We got Ralph Russo in person here at Amelia Island at ACC spring meetings, but we're, of course, talking about former Big Ten punters because I almost forgot to press record on this, and I was telling Ralph about the time that I forgot to press record when I was interviewing Tory Taylor, the former Iowa punter, and he graciously redid the entire interview.
You got to understand, punters are geared towards things went poorly.
Yes.
I am here to make them better.
Yes.
Like that is the essence of what it means to be a punter.
Man, I'm going to miss Tory Taylor in college football.
And so will Iowa.
Oh, yeah.
Though they will always find another.
Well, listen, we talked about it earlier this week. Like, Iowa could go 10-2 against this schedule with a comp. You know, if Cade McNamara is all right, stays healthy, Lachey's healthy, like, yeah. I might retire my Iowa jokes for a little while.
We've heard this before, but obviously there's a big component that has changed.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Not to keep piling on Brian Ferentz, but they have a new offensive coordinator there.
Oh, I thought we were talking about the 12-team playoff.
Oh, because, yeah. Well, then there's that.
Yeah.
And then there's that, right? If you're Iowa, now all of a sudden you're looking like, hey, man, we can make that. We might have a chance at that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, we're going to talk about the ACC in a second.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you and I have talked about while we're here is the idea of ACC at large teams and how it's going to shift from can we get a team into the playoff to can we get 3 teams into the playoff.
Right.
Iowa is in that weird position of Big Ten team, did not get a terrible Big Ten schedule draw.
Mm-hmm.
And it's realistic. Like I put it out and I knew what I was doing when I tweeted it out.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, okay, I'm doing this for the shock value of Iowa in the playoff. But then you think about it, you become the Alonzo Mourning gif. You're like, you know what? Okay.
That conversation is going to be had with a lot of teams. But also the core of that conversation, like in the middle of that, is how do we value these 10 wins? Because there's going to be a massive shift in the discussion around strength of schedule. We've been having this banging our heads against strength of schedule.
This 9-3 SEC team went through the meat grinder. Yeah.
But in reality, though, like I think the SEC and the Big Ten are all geared up to say, they've already established this. Like, oh, we're going to be better than them. We're going to be tougher than them. But even with the more interesting part of it to a certain degree is even within those conferences, not everybody has the supercharged schedule.
Yes.
Some a little more supercharged than others. So this is going to be, for those of us who get a little exhausted about the strength of schedule and who you ain't played nobody.
Yeah.
It's going to ramp up even more in college football.
And Notre Dame, which is kind of the most interesting component of that, I think most Notre Dame schedules of the last 10 years you would have looked at and gone, well, if they're 10-2, they're in the 12-team playoff. This particular one, and again, we don't know how good everybody's going to be, but on paper right now, you look at it and you're like, maybe they need to be 11-1.
Right, because all of a sudden you think, well, what is USC going to be? And they draw Clemson, but they don't draw Florida State.
They don't have Clemson. They have Florida State.
Florida State, not Clemson. Yeah. And I think we think Florida State's going to be pretty good, but we're also pretty sure they're not going to be as good as they were last year. So it's not.
Oh, I don't know. I've gotten a lot of Florida State Kool-Aid on this trip. You were a day behind me.
Okay.
So you have not gotten the infusion of Florida State Kool-Aid quite yet.
I mean, I've only been in the state less than 24 hours. Yeah. So yeah, it could be.
There's a lot. Let's put it this way: there's a lot of Florida and Florida State Kool-Aid running around. They're different flavors, obviously.
Yes.
One's orange and blue, and one's garnet and gold, and one's about winning the ACC and being in the playoff, and one's about overperforming expectations.
Sure.
And going like 7-5
and making sure the coach doesn't get fired.
Right. But there's a lot of that Kool-Aid going around. But let's on this topic of it's a 12-team playoff. We're readjusting our thinking. We're readjusting our brains. If you're the ACC, obviously your champion's getting in. You're not having a situation like last year. Like Florida State, the Florida State of last year in this system is a top 4 seed, has a bye, all of that jazz.
Right.
But can the ACC get 2 more teams in? Is that possible? Can it get one? You know what? It should get one more, we think. But But then you go through the recent history of it. They actually probably not even as strong as the Big 12 minus Oklahoma and Texas in some of these years.
Well, depth-wise, right?
Right,
I think
they would have that one elite team.
I think that's always going to be the question
Yeah.
about the ACC is depth.
Yeah.
And how many, once you get down to 3, 4, 5, are you still talking about potential playoff contenders? The interesting thing to me, Andy, on all of this is when we started having these conversations about a 12-team playoff, I think we were far more open-minded before realignment to the idea that, there could be some real jostling between all the conferences. So sure, we think the SEC is always going to get an extra one because it tends to be the way things are with the SEC. But, the ACC and the Big 12. But I think that with realignment and establishing these imaginary or real dividing lines between these conferences, I think now we're wondering exactly what you're saying is can the ACC consistently be in the mix for getting 3? Do they even have to worry about getting a second team? And I think that's the more disconcerting part. But the simple idea that they might have to worry about a second team, I think if you're the ACC,
I'm not that worried about a second team though, because I'm like, we've got this on the graphic right now. Who's in the ACC now? Which is it's a lot of people. Let's be real here. It goes coast to coast. Exactly. It's not just the Atlantic coast anymore. It's got the Pacific coast as well. But there's going to be another 10-win team in the ACC.
I think so.
Whether it's Clemson, Miami, NC State,
but then
Louisville.
But then again,
somebody's going to be that team.
I'll give you another one. Virginia Tech.
I
think Virginia Tech's got a lot of players coming back. And again, it goes back to that idea of schedule. So this is why I'm saying that schedule conversation is not just going to be a conference versus conference. Because if I'm in the ACC and I'm Virginia Tech and I've played X schedule.
Vanderbilt and Rutgers?
Yeah. Rutgers is going to be pretty good.
I know Rutgers is going to be pretty good.
But nonetheless, but if I played X schedule and all of a sudden I'm Miami and I've played Y schedule, or again, I haven't looked through them all.
Miami's Florida, USF. Those are their
the fact of the matter is, not all the schedules are going to be created equal in these conferences. The more you put teams into these conferences, you're going to create not just imbalance from SEC to Big 10 to Big 12 to ACC, but imbalance within the conference. So if I'm a 9-3 team in the ACC with Clemson's schedule, and I'm a 10-2 team in the ACC with Virginia Tech or maybe Miami schedule. If I'm Clemson, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
You're going to go, why did we bother playing Georgia?
Right. Yeah. Even if we lose to Georgia, I can say, hey, listen, it was 24-10, and that's pretty good if you look at that Georgia team, or maybe it was 24-17. Yeah. I understand we lost, but if you're comparing our 9-3 and that's one of the 3, so that conversation is going to be much deeper, and I think also lead to, frankly, I think eventually it might lead to changes with the selection process.
Yeah, and I think they're sort of feeling all that out, and I've got my Rollback Performance polo on right now. I wear the Performance hoodies all the time. Doesn't matter if it's spring, summer, fall, winter. They are perfect for any season. Shorts, polos, Q-zips, joggers. They got it all at Rollback. You will look great. You will perform at your best. Remember, I was wearing a Rollback hoodie when I caught a pass in an SEC football game. I know what you're saying, Andy. When you played football, you were an offensive lineman, so it certainly wasn't one of those games. That's true. And also, Rollback didn't exist yet. So what happened? Well, I caught a pass from Haynes King when he played for Texas A&M. He was throwing it away. I was on the Alabama sideline. I left-handed, one-handed, caught it. Was actually filming with my right hand. It's on video. It's all because of Rollback. When I'm not wearing Rollback, I can't do anything like that. So get yourself some Rollback. Performance polos, hoodies, Q-zips, jogger shorts, you name it. Rollback is RHOBACK. You go to rollback.com, RHOBACK.com. Use the code Andy and get 20% off your first purchase. I just keep saying, and I said this on the show on Tuesday, we keep saying they need to do this, they need to do this, they need to do this. What they need to do is figure out who's in what conference first. Yeah. And then they can do all this other stuff. And we don't know who's in what conference in 2-3 years right now.
Right. And being here with the ACC, I mean, this is the point of contact, right? This is the place where the pivot point where things could go awry. I think the other part that I've been saying a lot when it comes to this year and next year and the playoff is a little bit of a trial run, right? 12-teamer, first couple of years. We think it might even be going to 14 by 2026.
But who knows?
Maybe not. But I do think a lot of what we're going to see when I was out in Arizona talking to folks in some other conferences, this idea of, we have some ideas about maybe what the selection process should look like and how to maybe give them a little more guidance, them being the selection committee. But I don't know if we're going to be able to implement anything this year. Let's see how it plays out. I think it comes to the selection process. I think it comes to with the sites and where these games are played. And I think to a certain degree, it might determine how many teams are getting in. Yeah.
And I'm fascinated to see how the selection process goes. I'm sure the ACC is too, because what happened last year was so psychologically damaging.
No doubt. I mean, it's still a topic of conversation.
Absolutely. And I also think because it happened to Florida State, and Florida State had warned in its trustees meeting in August, as they sort of got the ball rolling toward suing the ACC, like they had warned this might happen, that there's a disadvantage here, that you're not perceived as being in the strongest conference. So you've got to deal with that disadvantage. But I do think if there are some teams at the top that are clearly better than everybody else, that they're going to be okay. Like they're going to have 2 and maybe 3 teams in the playoff, and it's just a matter of who those teams are. Like if Miami achieves what the roster suggests they should achieve, they should be able to make it. If Louisville, like I keep saying, like if we've still never seen a healthy full season of Tyler Shuck.
Which is amazing because it seems like he's been here for 6 or 7 years.
And Tyler Shuck has all the tools. And I keep saying it's sort of like Michael Penix when he left Indiana. Like we've never seen a fully healthy season of this guy. Yeah. And he's with Jeff Brom, who's a total quarterback whisperer. So Louisville's another one. You mentioned Virginia Tech, NC State. They've got Grayson McCall now at quarterback. We know their defense is going to be good. Casey Concepcion comes back. So it's like there is potential in a lot of places.
I think if you are the ACC, right? I mean, this new world order, you're sort of eyeing the Big 12.
Yes.
Now that might be a little bit of a loser's lament, but I think you're comparing yourself more so to the Big 12.
Now, I will say the ACC has more non-conference opportunities, it feels like, to show what you can do. You have Clemson against Georgia, Miami and Florida State.
You have all these SEC games, right? Like if you do well against them, you should be rewarded.
Notre Dame.
Well, it goes back to also why the Florida State thing was so jarring last year, because Florida State is a school that should get the benefit of the doubt.
And had beaten LSU.
Should get the benefit of the doubt, had beaten Florida. I think if you're the ACC, and let's just talk about this year, the construction of the conference this year, we know things might change, but where you think you have an advantage is, hey, we have these high ceiling programs. And I think in the Big 12, they are going to be incredibly competitive. But I think a lot of those schools are going to have to overcome the perception that, like, well, you're good, but can you really win a national championship? Because you haven't.
And that's even harder.
Seen you do it.
What if UCF is sitting there in the Big 12 championship game, which they very well could be.
I think any of about 12 teams could end up in the Big 12.
But that's going to be one of those ones where in the back of the minds of the committee members, they're going to be going, "Oh, are you deep enough? You know, can you?" Whereas if it's Miami and you're trying to weigh the two,
no doubt,
I think Miami wins that.
I think so. And listen,
it'll depend on what's happened.
People will push back on that and say, well, we shouldn't have such deference to the big brands. But the fact of the matter is the big brands tend to recruit at a higher level. They also, again, going back to those opportunities, the ACC is going to have these opportunities between Notre Dame and a lot of their relationships with the SEC to sort of say, hey, listen, we proved that. We got to that bar. So I think that should play into the ACC's favor. Again, the bottom might be a little farther. There might be a little bigger gap, but I do think the ACC's high ceiling programs should give them an advantage over the Big 12.
I'm just excited also about what the 12-team playoff means kind of at the end of the season, what some of these games could be like. Like imagine Clemson's 9-2 going into the South Carolina game, and South Carolina's had a decent season. Like that game becomes awesome. We talked about the other day, we were talking about, let's say USC decides they're going to play defense this year. and they're 9-2 going into the Notre Dame game, and like it's 2 9-2 teams in what could be a play-in game. Like, how great would that be?
Right. There's going to be a lot more opportunities for, this happened a couple of years ago, right? South Carolina beat Clemson.
Yes.
Sort of a shocking game.
Right after they beat Tennessee.
Rattler threw for a zillion yards in that game. He threw for 2 zillion against Tennessee.
Right.
And that was a spoiler game. There's going to be a lot more opportunities for, even in these rivalry weekend matchups, to include some spoiler element.
Yeah,
at
like
least
we just
one
talked
of the
about
teams,
Louisville.
Right.
Like Louisville, if you're in that position, you better beat Kentucky. Don't let Kentucky knock you out of the playoff. Like,
right. Which again raises the stakes for all of those games.
Yeah. And that part I'm very excited about. Yeah. As we're starting to get these kickoff times rolling in. Like, I don't know about you. I just kind of smile because it's like, okay, it's starting to feel real.
Because it also sort of reminds me too about, that's right, that game's on the schedule. That game's on the schedule, and look where that one's being played. So yeah, you definitely get sort of ramped up. When you start seeing the kick times.
Like you've had to cover this probably a little more than I have, the settlement in the House case, the NCAA stuff.
Sure.
So I want to talk to you about this because Charlie Baker was here on Monday and talked about potential settlement. He talked to the ACC leaders about it. You and I talked off air about this. Like, I cannot believe I'm hearing an NCAA president say that. And I realize, given everything that's happened in the last few years, if you just dropped in, this makes perfect sense to you. But if you've been following this for 20 years or so, like, the idea that they're just going to cave on this is still, wow.
It's it's remarkable when you think back to how long, again, quite literally, it's been about 20 years since I've been covering this on a national level. Yeah. And if you go back and recall some of the conversations and the way this stuff was framed 2015, really even as much as like 5 or 6 years ago, because that's when it really started to move quickly in this direction. If you want to put a pin in it, you can say the Supreme Court case ruling coming down in 2021.
And I think that did sort of change the dynamics.
It also sped things up. Yes. Right. At that point, it became very clear that, none of this is going to stand anymore.
Yeah.
I think even before the Supreme Court ruling, it was becoming fairly obvious that things were going to change, but the Supreme Court ruling sped everything up. But you're right. The idea of an NCAA president, and I think this has been significant, and I think, frankly, it's some of the things that I think with Baker, he hasn't gotten enough credit for. I'm not saying we have to throw a party or a parade for the guy.
There never will be one for an NCAA president, so don't worry about that.
He's in a position that will always be viewed with skepticism, though he has taken over for a guy who was viewed with the ultimate skepticism and probably had worn out his welcome. But I do think it is significant that he has been an active participant and a catalyst in the conversation about moving things in the direction of professionalism.
I remember when he came out with the idea, the Project D1.
Yeah,
is what he calls it. And the linchpin of that is schools saying we will devote X amount of dollars to share with the players. It could be X amount of dollars, it could be X percentage of revenue, whatever that is. It's basically a minimum threshold. It's the floor.
And if you want to be in this new tier, you have to commit to that floor.
Right. And that pissed a lot of people off because they weren't consulted on it. Now, when you start to see the leaks about what the potential settlement might look like, then you go, okay, I think I know where he was cribbing this from.
It's not that far away from what we're heading toward through this settlement. The numbers may be a little different. I think there's some subtle differences between the idea of in Baker's model, you could sort of buy your way into the game, as opposed to in this model, you're still controlled over who's in the game, so to speak. And there's some subtleties there about, we can talk about conference realignment.
Let us talk about that because you were in Phoenix at the beginning of the month. So the Big 12 was meeting there, the American, the Mountain West.
So and some other college football officials were through there.
And so, but like for the Mountain West people and the people in the American, how do they feel about this? Where are they at on this?
So I think generally speaking, the more I talk to folks in G5 conferences in general, I think there's sort of a resignation of, okay, I just want to know the playing field is. We don't have to chase that. We're not really.
Well, that's right. What are they going to be able to buy in, or do you think they have to kind of find their own level?
I think there will be case by case.
Okay.
Which is a little bit of a bailout answer. Do I think some schools will look at that as an opportunity? Because again, there's only so much you're going to be able to buy in because you can't buy your way into the conference.
Right.
I think with Baker's idea, you could buy your way into this subdivision, which could have gotten you something of a seat at the table.
Which, if you weren't at one of the conferences, you'd have to form your own conferences with the other people who bought in.
To a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
There was some complications there. And now, frankly, the big conferences can still gatekeep a little bit, as opposed to who gets into the club. Though I do think, listen, I think we can probably name them, right? Boise State will probably look at this and think, how can we get close?
Yeah.
Memphis will probably look at this and say, how can we get in the ballpark of this? Maybe Tulane, because you're catching them at a good point, right? They're sort of trending up, but frankly, I don't know if Tulane has the infrastructure to be able to really, to be able to go all in on something like this.
Here's one that has not been as successful lately, though they had a good year under their first-year coach last year, and they're building a stadium on campus, and they're so USF
without
which
question.
Is trying to kind of follow the UCF trajectory.
But even then, you're still going to be competing within your own conference. Are you just positioning yourself for the next round of call-ups? Probably. When does that happen? I don't know. Could be a while. So how much are you, but this has been a conversation for years about how much do you leverage yourself to look like a Power 5 school. And then if they don't,
we don't use that anymore.
Right. Now, I don't even know if Power 4 is applicable anymore.
Yeah.
How much do you leverage yourself to look like a Power whatever school? And then you don't get that call up and now you're just stuck with a bunch of debt.
Yeah.
because you've bought in to try to, with the assumption that eventually we'll get that big paycheck.
And that's why I keep saying, don't get too caught up in what the playoffs going to look like in 2026. We don't know. Yeah. We don't know. And this next few steps will help us figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think so. And I think it's an important time for Group of 5 schools. And I'll give you another element of that. You have all these new AAC schools just came in last year. The AAC's got a pretty good television deal relative, right? There's going to be some that's going to lift up some of these schools, but they're not there yet.
Yeah.
So if you're North Texas, I may say to you, North Texas, I keep an eye on them, and people may shrug and really North Texas, they got a lot of nice stuff there. They're about to have an infusion of cash. What does that look like for them in a few years? I think if you're the AAC, you're hoping that you create the next UCF, Houston, Cincinnati. Now you're hoping to hold them for a little longer, but you're hoping that a few of those schools emerge and become that level.
It's going to be fascinating to watch because everything will change, including based on all of the lawsuits flying around this building right now. So.
Sure. And there's a whole other element of, again, like what will the next round of, again, realignment, sorting out, consolidation, some might call it, look like once the ACC figures out what its future is.
He's Ralph Russo. And for once, he's not going to text me yelling about what he's hearing on the show because he'd be yelling about himself.
Maybe, though. Maybe.
I
might critique myself.
That Russo guy's an idiot, Andy. Why do you have him on? Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On 3 Sports YouTube channel.